The Buckeye road trip around the NFL continues. Ross Jackson from Locked on Saints and from the Saints Wire is back with us. We talked about a couple New Orleans Saints players already, but today is special because first up, we're talking about a player in the defensive back room that had Malcolm Jenkins in it. He's no longer there due to retirement, but a first round pick, number 11 overall pick via the New Orleans Saints in the 2017 draft, Marshon Lattimore, four-time Pro Bowler. He was Rookie of the Year in 2017 as well. This young man is talented, and I'm glad Ross is here to help us learn about what we can expect from Marshon in the upcoming NFL season. Ross, I'm glad you're back.
Hey, man, always glad to be here with you. There's something about New Orleans Saints pick 11 and Ohio State Buckeyes. It just seems to work out. It just seems to work out.
A little play on numbers there, hopefully. I'm curious. There's a way they could get a number 11, a number 11 pick next year on their squad. This young man's talented. I mean, I can say it about a lot of people you and I have talked about this year, last year as well. But what makes his talent be perfect for the Saints?
Well, there's a couple different things. I mean, his ability to be by himself on an island, lockdown corner, that is something every NFL defense needs in order to succeed. You look at the guys that have the big contracts right now, which include, of course, Marshon Lattimore. He got a big contract after week one. He finished up week one against the Green Bay Packers in Jacksonville, broke his hand, but still had enough strength in that hand to sign a humongous deal right after that game. Then you see like Jair Alexander this offseason. He's another one of those guys that's a lockdown corner that gets a big contract. That's what NFL defenses need to have. It's what gets drafted highly. It's why you saw guys like Derek Stingley come off the board, Sauce Gardner in this year's draft. Every NFL defense is looking for that. And the New Orleans Saints had theirs drop right into their lap at pick 11 a couple of years ago. And as you mentioned, a guy that would go on to be Defensive Rookie of the Year. So his on-field talent is huge. His fit in terms of scheme versatility as somebody that can play zone but can also play man, and that's not afraid to man up and shadow a number one wide receiver. That's huge for Dennis Allen's scheme as well, which is a bit of a man-heavy scheme, but that also requires you to play a lot of man match and zone match coverages to where you're watching wide receiver patterns and then you're kind of reacting on an if-then kind of basis. And so you have to have a high mental processing ability, which Ohio State Buckeyes, that's one of the reasons why the Saints continue to go back to them, because these guys play at an NFL level all 3-4 years of college that they're there. And so that helps them translate. The last thing that I'll mention is his leadership. You mentioned former Buckeye Malcolm Jenkins, who retired this offseason. That kind of puts Marshon Lattimore into a leadership role in this in this defense, and particularly in the secondary. Now, a lot of people are going to point to Tyrann Mathieu, and that is true, but this is Tyrann Mathieu's first season with the team. This will be Marshon Lattimore's, since 2017. So for him, he ends up being now the most experienced secondary member. He ends up being the leader, the most educated leader, the person that knows the system more, the person that knows how to communicate the system, and the person that knows how to train up maybe some of these young defensive backs that are around on that secondary. So he has a lot of responsibility. That's one of the big reasons, and his comfort with that is one of the reasons why he fits into the culture.
Ross, the Saints, I've seen previously where they have had a left corner and a right corner. One guy stays on one side of the field, the other stays on the other. With Lattimore being the leader and being as good as he is there a position that he will play that could be more of a rover, like following the number one receiver on the opposite team?
I think there's absolutely a chance that you see more of that in 2022. We certainly saw a little bit more of it in 2021 because the guy that started opposite Marshon Lattimore last year was a rookie, and Paulson Adebo, who came in from Stanford. So I do think that you'll see that. He plays predominantly at sort of what you would call the right cornerback, which of course is defensive right, offensive left. And that tends to be the weak side for offenses, which is usually where that number one wide receiver or the split end will end up lining up. So for the most part, him playing over on that side of the field ends up putting him in that situation. But if you look at his corner splits, he played, if you look at just the cornerback snaps that he took, he played 81% over on the defensive right and then 19% over on the defensive left. So he still does a lot of moving around. And if you move over there and then you take a look at some of maybe like the split coverages as well, you could see a little bit of another another like 10% over on the left side. So he'll do quite a bit to where he'll move around, but a lot of it is going to be dictated about where that number one wide receiver is and also who that number two wide receiver is as well. Because in some cases, like when you're lining up against, let's say, the Minnesota Vikings, you want to cover, Adam Thielen, or you want to cover Justin Jefferson. And for Marshon Lattimore, the answer is yes. Put him on whoever lines up in front of him, and he thinks he's the better. He believes he's the better player, and that's exactly the attitude you have to have.
81% one side on the right, defensive right, 19% defensive left. You thinking more like a 70-30, or you thinking more like a 65-35? Trying to get my math correct so people don't hop in and say, Jay, your math is horrible. Buddy, I'm talking while I'm trying to use my brain at the same time. It doesn't go well all the time. But
it's not a perfect science. It's not.
No, it's not. I wish it was. I make a lot more money. You think more 65-35, 70-30 on the splits as far as defensive right versus defensive left?
Yeah, I think maybe 70-30, 75-25, like 3/4 one side, 1/4 the other, just based upon the wide receiver talent that he's going to be facing this year. He has a lot of really, really good wide receivers that he's going to be going up against, including guys that are going to be rookies looking to make an impact immediately, like Drake London, but he's also going to find himself lined up across from guys like DK Metcalf and Devontae Adams again, now that he's in Las Vegas and everything, right? So because of the talent of wide receivers and the caliber of number one wideouts that he's going to be matching up with in 2022, you might see him move around a little bit more.
What do you think about this leadership and him assisting Tyrann Mathieu being on the team now? You talk about Mathieu being down in the bayou. Great. He's back in the same area that he's wanted to be in for quite a while, I'm pretty sure. But how is he going to be able to assist Mathieu not just be a great teammate and be a great player, but also be someone that is filling the holes of a guy that Saints fans, people like yourself, Saints media, Saints players, they all loved Malcolm Jenkins.
Mm-hmm. And I think because of the fact that it's Tyrann Mathieu, he's going to fill that gap a little bit of who loves him already and everything as well. But I do think that the on-field sort of fill-in that Tyrann Mathieu is going to provide doesn't have to be 100% of what Malcolm Jenkins provided, because Tyrann Mathieu is a little bit younger. He's a little bit more versatile at this point in his career versus where Malcolm Jenkins' most recent stint with the Saints was in his career, which was 33, 34 years old, 32, 33 years old. And so because of that, you'll see Tyrann Mathieu do a lot of different things. You'll see him, take some of those free safety, deep center field snaps. You'll see him play down in the box. You'll see him play in the slot. So you see him move around a lot more than maybe you saw Malcolm Jenkins. So the on-field responsibility is going to be a little bit different, and it's going to be a little bit of a change for Dennis Allen's scheme, which really relies on that deep safety. But he's got Marcus May that can kind of help to fill that role as well, barring any, we got to figure out what's going to happen with his suspension. But the way that Marshon Lattimore ends up helping there is that no matter what, that side of the field is in the best case scenario, right? The safety help doesn't have to come over to Marshon Lattimore as much as maybe you might send that safety help over to Paulson Adebo, or to the heavier side of the field where you might have a 3-by-1 stack or placement by the offense. And based on that, Marshon Lattimore is probably lined up with the one that's all by himself. And you can let that happen over on that side of the field. So it makes Tyrann Mathieu's job a little bit easier. In that case, maybe a little bit easier than what he experienced in Kansas City, whose defense kind of struggled in the passing game for many of the years that he was there, even though, let's not fake it, right? He still won a Super Bowl there. But I think that that's a piece that really helps him. The other piece is what happens off the field, what happens away from Sundays, practice, all of that. Those guys get to be leaders together, help each other translate the game to one another, and help them disseminate that information to the rest of the secondary.
Ross, this is fun, man. Any last comments about Marshon Lattimore and what we can expect from him in the upcoming NFL season?
I'm really excited about his year this year. I think that there are a lot of people that have accused Marshon Lattimore, I think maybe wrongfully, of being a little bit too inconsistent. I think there have been inconsistencies, but there are at that position. That's what it's like to play cornerback. And his short memory, everything that he's able to do, how quickly he gets over everything, him playing with a club on his hand for most of the season last year. I think this year is going to be a big season for him. And even for the folks that do believe that he's inconsistent, what they often say is that he always shows up against the best talent. And again, he's got a lot of really, really top tier wide receiver talent to match up with in 2022. So even for the folks that believe he's inconsistent, they should expect to see the best of Marshon Lattimore in 2022.
Ross, let the people know, because I could say it, but you say it so much better than I can. Where can they follow you on Twitter? and then read everything that you write and listen to everything that you say about the New Orleans Saints.
Absolutely. You can find the Locked On Saints podcast free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. You can find all the written work over at saintswire.usatoday.com. And if you want to make it easier on yourself, you can find all of that and more on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA, N-O-L-A.
So much fun. We're not done yet. There's more Saints players to talk about because the Buckeyes, they make good talent. They develop them, and the New Orleans Saints love to bring them down south. Ross, thanks for coming on again. I really appreciate it.
Always a pleasure, buddy. Thanks for having me on.
Boom.